Okay, now let's see a different use case for retain statement. Okay, so now earlier I was interested in identifying the total score of a subject. Now I am interested in identifying the number of subjects with a non-missing score. So how would I do that? So I am interested in identifying the number of subjects for a student with non-missing scores. Okay, so what would I write? Like for example, if score is not equal to missing, then let me create a variable called counter. Okay, counter is equal to counter plus 1. Okay, right? If score not equal to missing, I am expecting that the counter would be incremented by 1 for every non-missing occurrence of uh, my non-missing score. Okay, let's see what happens in PDB. So what happens? So we have three variables. So student, subject, and score, and we are creating a so SAS evaluated in the compilation stage. When SAS sees this if statement, it understands that we are creating a new variable called counter. Okay, right? So we are creating a new variable called counter with an assignment statement which involves an arithmetic operation. So what happens? SAS creates it as a numeric variable and assigns a default length of 8. Okay, SAS has done that. Now the compilation stage is done. Let's see how SAS processes this data step. Before the first observation starts, SAS sets it to PDB to missing values with the but based on the data type. So numeric missings are represented with a dot and character missings are represented with a null value. Okay. Okay. Now SAS starts executing and the first observation is being copied from the existing dataset into PDB maths. Okay, and then this corresponding score, and then this execution of the set statement is done, and then SAS moves on to execution of this statement. If score not equal to missing, yes, right, on the first observation the score is not equal to missing, the value is 100, then we are asking SAS to create a value called counter is equal to counter plus 1, right? So what is the value of counter here? And it is missing, and then we are adding a value of 1 to it. So what are we trying to do here? Perform an operation which involves missing values. So what should SAS do? So okay, it will keep track of how many number of times this is happening. This is the first instance this is happening, right? So it says like okay, it remembers me. Okay, first time the missing value note is happening on this line at this column, right? So maybe I think at this column. So it keeps track of those things. So missing and plus 1. Now what would be the resulting value on our output record? So it would be missing, right? And what happens on the second observation, as we have not asked us to retain the counter variable, so it would be set to missing again, and the values from the second observation would start overwriting, right? And signs and the corresponding score. And again the same process. Is score not equal to missing? Here this is missing. So we do not have this missing values operation performed here. Okay. So as this is not getting executed, so as this is false, score not equal to missing, then the SAS does not try to perform this arithmetic operation. So this we don't have. So on the first observation, we are just let's assume that SAS is keeping a counter of how many times missing values were generated. Okay. So it happened on first observation, so it kept a track of 1. So the second statement has executed, so it does not. So there was no missing values operation were performed and it is 0. Let's move on to the third observation. What happens now? So counter is set back to missing again, and subject social, and then score of 96, and then what is happening? Is score not equal to missing? True. Then SAS tries to execute this statement. Okay, so missing plus 1, so it is resulting in missing values note. so it keeps track. So when SAS processes this complete data step, we only have 3 observations and only 2 instances we have this missing value generated node. So missing value generated node, so as I mentioned, so it indicates the number of times the missing values node operation was performed. So it would give the line number of times and the line and the column at which the missing values node was generated. Okay, so here how many times we had on the 3 observations, the missing values node was generated twice on this line. So SAS would give the line number in the log and then the column at which the issue happened, so that we can go and check that piece of code. Okay, so as we have seen that the counter value can be asked to be retained by SAS, right? So how do we modify this syntax now? Okay, how do we modify this syntax? Okay, to add a retain statement. So just let's say we have said that a retain statement can be used to list the variables, okay, that have to be retained, whose value has to be retained across observations, across iterations of the data step. Okay, retain counter, and on top of it we can also add an initial value of, okay, add an initial value of 0, or it could be any number. Here I am initializing SAS counter variable with a 0 value instead of missing. Okay, so if I am not giving this 0, there is of no use because SAS initializes it with missing. So on the first observation, the counter would become missing plus 1, right? So it would again result in a missing value. So this initialization is equally important after asking SAS to retain the value present in this counter variable. So let's say if I am asking only SAS to retain this, okay, counter value with retain the counter variable's value, but not initialized with this value. So what would be the initial value? So it would be set to missing. So on reading the first observation, the subject match, and then the score is 100. Okay, is the score not equal to missing? True. Then so we have asked SAS to retain only the value of the counter, but we have not initialized the value at PDV level. So what is happening? By default, the SAS initializes it with a missing value. So again, it is trying to perform a arithmetic operation on missing value. So SAS again gives a value of missing on your first observation. Okay. Similarly, on the rest of the observation also, like as this is missing, on the subsequent observations also the missing value would be retained. So before reading the next observation, SAS would not overwrite missing with missing. SAS just keeps like what is there in the memory. So otherwise, what would have happened if we have not used the retain statement? So before the second observation is processed, the newly created variable counter would have been reset to missing. But as we have asked SAS to retain it, so SAS does not go and try to set this to missing. So though, however, it may have missing value in it, but SAS is not going to set it to missing again. Okay. Now let's switch and make it as 0. So in the compilation stage, so it would have had a value of 0, and the set statement is executed. These 3 values have come into PDB. So is this statement true? Is score not equal to missing? True. So then what is happening? Counter is equal to counter plus 1. What is the value of counter now? As we have initialized it with 0 on the first observation, it is 0 plus, it is resolving it was 0 plus 1. So what would be the value of counter and the newly created value? So on the first observation, the counter would be 1, right? Next, let's move on to the second observation. So if we had not used the retain statement, what would have happened? This 1 is present at the end of the data step. So this 1 would have been overwritten with missing value. But we have asked SAS to retain it. So SAS just keeps it that 1 in memory. Okay. And now it reads second observation, the science value and the score associated with science. Okay. Now what is happening? Is score not equal to missing? False. So this does not get executed. And then what will be the value of the counter on the second observation? It is still 1, right? And now SAS is moving on to process the next observation. So if we had not used the retain, it would the total counter variables value would have been set to missing. But as we have used retain, so it is 1 in the memory, and then it goes and processes the next record. So this one is social, right? And then associated score. Is score not equal to missing? Yes. Then it goes and executes this counter statement, and then it gives like what is the value of counter in memory now? So 1 plus 1. So, so what would be the value of counter on the second record? 2. So what was our initial requirement? To count the number of subjects with non-missing score, right? This is the subject, right? Number of subjects with non-missing score. So I have made use of my return statement and my assignment statement to count the number of subjects with non-missing value. If I look at that last record of that student, I'll know the number of records subjects with a non-missing score. Okay, now so we have seen like earlier also we have seen that on that subject's last record, okay, we either had the counter variable or total score. In order to see, okay, the last record, okay, let's assume this data set is only for one subject. Okay, so in order to identify the number of subjects with non-missing score or the total score, we have to filter or we have to subset this particular record, right? So we have an option in SAS statement, okay, this set statement, which is called end is equal to. It is an option. End is equal to is an option in set statement. So which identifies like it will have a value of 1 on the last record that is being read into PDV. Okay. So we have an option called end is equal to. Okay. So we can give any name of a variable to store the value of the resulting expression end is equal to. Let's say I am naming a variable called end last by using the option end is equal to last. What happens with this option is, so it SAS knows like is this the last observation in the data set. Okay, when data is already available in the form of data set, so SAS knows how many number of observations are present in this data set. So what happens is like with this option I am creating a temporary variable in PDV. Okay, temporary variable in PDV with the name last. Okay, what happens here is like SAS knows it asks this question: is this the last observation? Is this the last observation in this data set? No. So it assigns a value of 0. Then again in the next process, like in the when processing the second observation, SAS asks this question: is this the last observation in this data set? No. So and again on the last observation it asks this question: as this is the last observation, it turns that value to 1. So it the values in this variable, this variable, this is a temporary variable, and it would not be returned to your output data set. Okay, it would not be returned to your output data set. So return in the sense WRITTEN. You will not find a variable named last in your output data set. This is a temporary variable. We can make use of this variable in this processing, but it will not by default. It will not write that variable to your output data set. Okay, can we make use of, because we know that the value in the last variable would be 1 only on the last record, and as we have seen that our total score or total number of subjects with non-missing score can be found on the last record of that subject, right? Last record of that data set. Okay, last record of that data set. So can we make use of this statement? If last is equal to 1, then output. Okay, so output is nothing but we are asking SAS to write that observation to the dataset. So by default what used to happen, so whenever SAS sees this run statement, so it writes the observation to your output dataset. So what happened when SAS processed the first observation, all these lines of code, and it comes to run statement. Okay, in this run statement SAS assumes that okay, there is an instruction for me to write the dataset to the storage. Okay, so we call this as like whenever SAS sees this run statement, it writes the observation to the memory, like the storage. So we call like this inherent instruction for SAS to write the data record to the external storage. So we call this as an implicit output statement because we are not explicitly stating SAS to write the observation to the storage. So, but we call this output writing of the output record to the storage when SAS sees this run statement as an implicit output statement. Okay, so whenever we are, because we call this as implicit because we are not explicitly asking SAS to write the observation. So SAS understands that okay, I have come till the end of the data step process, so I have to write the observation to dataset. So that's why whenever we see this run statement, we say that there is an implicit run statement. So what is happening? So we can instead use this statement, okay, output statement. So whenever we use this output statement, the implicit output statement will not work. The run statement sees this, but at least there is one output statement in this piece of code. So already SAS is has seen in the compilation stage that there is one output statement. So then it will not that implicit output option in run will not work. So it will write the observation at this point. Whenever this is this output statement, SAS starts writing the observation to the storage. And the implicit output is not working now. It will not write the observation twice. So as I have this output statement here, so SAS writes the observation at this point in while executing the code. And that implicit output is not working anymore as there is an explicit output statement. Okay. So now what we did, so we asked SAS if last is equal to 1, then output. Output is nothing but you are asking SAS to write the record which is present in PDB till that moment to your dataset named score02. Okay. Output is nothing but you are asking SAS to write the record which is present and which is being observation which is being built in PDB to your output dataset. Okay. So what is happening now? So on the first record, this counter is 0. It has become 1 once this gets executed. Okay, counter is 1 on when this if statement is executed on the first observation. Okay, and then it is coming to this statement. If last is equal to 1, then output. Is last is equal to 1 on this first observation? No. So it is not going to write that observation now. But however, the value is value of counter is 1 in memory. We are using retain. Okay, and again, and as we have used an explicit output statement, the implicit output statement is not going to work here. So SAS will not write this record to your external dataset. So now this is not written. However, in memory, the counter is 1. Okay, and then SAS goes to the second observation, processes increments. So on the second record also the counter value is 1 as this score is missing because we are incrementing the counter only when the value is not missing, the score is not missing, only then the counter would be incremented. So is last is equal to 1 on this record? No. So the last value is 0 because we have used end is equal to last. The last value is 0 on this observation. So this observation is also not going to be written, okay, to your output data set. And what is happening now? SAS goes on to process the next observation. So it says like again, is the score not missing? The memory, what was the value of counter variable in memory? It was 1, and now it is incrementing it to 2, and then it says it moves on to the next statement. Is last is equal to 1 on this record? Yes. Okay. Is last is equal to 1, then output. So that observation would be returned to your output dataset. All the observations which are before this, which only the observation which is last in the dataset would be returned to your this thing. So whenever I use this if last is equal to 1, I can name this variable as anything. I can call it as A. If I am naming it as end is equal to A, then I would replace my condition with if A equal to 1. If I am replacing my variable if end is equal to, if I am using xyz. So what would happen? I would write a condition of if xyz is equal to 1. This is just a temporary variable which I am associating a name to it. So I am asking SAS to create a temporary variable named xyz and understand like whether that value is whether that record is a last record in this data set. So that record, the temporary variables value would be 0 on all the records which is not the last record, and on the last record of the dataset the value would be set to 1. So I can make use of this temporarily created variable in processing this kind of things, because when I am creating a total score, what is happening, I am only interested in now the last record, because on that last record I would have the total score, and on that last record I would have the variable called a counter, number of subjects with non-missing score. Okay, let's extend this logic a bit and just see, like, calculate the average now. Okay, so how do we need to calculate the average? Let's assume that we are considering the number of subjects with non-missing scores as denominator. Okay, number of subjects with non-missing scores as denominator. Okay, and the total score. So to get the average, okay, so we need to, what do we need to do to calculate the total score? We have to retain what is the variable. So let's say it is total. Okay, I am using this variable and I am initializing it to 0, and as I want to count the number of subjects with non-missing score, I am initializing another variable and asking it to be retained with 0. Okay, what should my condition be? Total is equal to, so total plus score, right? And then if score not equal to, because counter has to be incremented based on okay, there is a problem with this statement. I'll tell you what's going to happen. If score not equal to missing, then counter is equal to counter plus 1. Run. Okay, let's see how SAS processes this. Let's say again switch back to, we have one more variable called, so this is total, this is again counter, right? So both are numeric and we are asking SAS to retain both counter and total. Okay, so even before the first observation is executed, we are asking SAS to initialize these two variables with zeros. Okay, and now SAS starts processing the first observation. 101 maths score is 100. So SAS executes this total statement. What is the total now on the first observation? Total is equal to total plus score. 0 plus 100 is 100. Okay, and then SAS moves to the next statement's execution. If score not equal to missing, then counter is equal to counter plus 1. So 0, score not missing, so it would add 0 plus 1. Okay, and then it would return a value of 1, right? Done. And then SAS moves on to the next observation. If we have not asked SAS to retain these two variables, what would have happened? So these would have been set to missing, and then the second observation would have processed. But we have asked SAS to retain, so these values will stay as is in memory. And then the second subject score. So science, and then 97. So what are we trying to do next? Total is equal to total plus score, 100 plus 97. Right, it calculates that and keeps this in the total. No, the second score is missing, right? Sorry, right, 100 plus missing, right? See, now SAS retained the value from first observation, but total is equal to total plus score. So now 100 plus missing, so what would it become now? Missing, right? What would be the value on the second observation? So again, this SAS executes this statement. Score not equal to missing, then counter is equal to counter plus 1. So this does not get executed and it gets retained in the memory 1. So just notice the difference, as we have not used this if score not equal to missing. Okay, counter is remaining as 1, but total, now SAS has performed a missing values operation. Score is missing. So by the time this was processing, the value from previous observation was missing. So 100 plus missing. So what would be the resulting value? So it would turn to missing, right? So on the first observation, total was 100, counter was 1. On the second observation, what would happen? The total has now turned to 0, but the counter is now again 1. What is happening again? On the third observation, what would have happened? The score for social would come, right, into PDV, so which is 96, but the total is missing, right? So what is happening now on this record? So we are performing a missing value operation. So in the previous record it was missing plus 100. Now as it has performed a missing values operation, the value was has become missing. However, even if it was retained, the value is missing. Now it is becoming missing plus 96. So what would be the resulting value? It would be missing. Okay, and if this executes score not is equal to missing, this executes and this thing will be this. So and if we use that option of end is equal to last, we would get only this record, right? But the total score has become missing now. Okay, but actually the total score is not missing. 100 plus 96, this is a logical error which we are introducing, right? So what do we need to do here? So we just need to make it so this way. So as I have already written this logic here, and I am creating again total score only when if score not equal to missing, then total is equal to total plus score. Okay, now what would happen here? On the first record the value would be 100, and on the second record 100 plus missing. So would this be done? So if a score is not missing, this is not true, so this will not be executed. So the value would remain 100 on the second observation, right? As the score is not missing, this condition would not be executed on the second record. So for science, so the first observation is executed, the total was 100, right? Let's assume this way. Okay, so what is the score on the first record? And the first observation it is 0 0. So when this statement is executed, as score is not missing, this statement would be executed, the total would become 0, and when this statement is executed, the score counter would become 1, and then SAS processes the next data step, the next observation. So it reads the value of science into it, and then the value of missing. So but we when this is getting executed, as score is not missing, this would not be executed. So the total would not become missing here, because this is not executed, the value from previous observation is 100, and there is no operation performed on this variable called total in this current observation. This would become remain 100, and then the counter also will not get executed. This would remain as is, and then SAS moves on to the next observation. So the value on second observation would be 101. So for this, the third subject is social, score in 96, 100 plus as score is not equal to missing, SAS moves ahead and adds this to the existing value in total, so which is 100 plus 96, which would become 196. Okay, and then if score not equal to missing, then counter has to be incremented by a value of 1. So as score is not missing, counter would do like 1 plus 1, so and the value would be 2. Okay, clear? Now it has become 196 and 2. Okay, as we have seen, the end is equal to option. Let's introduce that as well. End is equal to last. Okay, right? So let me, if end is equal to, if the temporary variable I have given a name of last, if last is equal to 1, then average, let's say AVG is the variable to hold average, so total divided by counter. Okay, so what happens? So this statement gets executed. Let's say this was introduced initially only as the first thing. So this statement gets executed only once, that is on the last observation, because the last value would become only 1 on the last record of the data set. So if this is our entire program, so SAS comes to this line and sees, okay, is this true? No. So SAS does this entire processing. Okay. So if last is equal to 1, then average is equal to total by counter. So what would SAS do? Let's say I'm trying to create the average value. Okay. So it would be missing, right, on the first two records, because average is not being retained on the every observation, which it will be missing only. Okay. And on the last observation, what we are trying to do here is average is equal to total by counter. So on the last observation, what is the total? 196. And what is the counter? It is 2. So SAS does that processing in the PDV. Average is equal to 196 by 2. And then it gives a value of 98. So on the last observation, you would get one more variable with value of 98. Okay. And then I can write one more if statement, because I am only interested in seeing the average of this student. So I can just write if last is equal to 1, then output, right? Now how many records would I get in my dataset? As last equal to 1 will be present only on one of the observation, and that is on the last observation. So I would get this record only in my output dataset. So all this temporary processing is done, but we are asking SAS to write only the observation with last is equal to 1, because SAS is reading data from this dataset, processing it and writing it. We are only restricting the processing of this output statement. This internal counter increment, total score increment is happening in PDV. But that this writing of this record to your output dataset does not impact this reading and processing of this data in PDV. Only the writing is being controlled here, but all the processing is being done as is. Only, okay. So you are getting your last record, you are getting the total score, the counter, and you are creating the average. Clear? Okay, Amar?
Mama,